Right, good afternoon everybody and welcome to the EVCOM Industry Awards What Our Judges Are Looking For webinar. We're delighted to have you with us this afternoon. We haven't been running as many of these in the last couple of months, giving everybody a bit of a break because we were getting a little webinared out, I suspect, but delighted to be able to offer this session ahead of the deadlines coming up for entering the EVCOM London Live and Film Awards. So this is a first for us to trying to do one of these sessions in ahead to answer some questions and make sure that we're helping our members as well as we can to make sure that the entry process is as smooth as possible. So we have with us today three members and people who have judged for EVCOM before and people who are highly practiced at what they do and also people who have entered EVCOM Awards themselves. So they touch all the bases. So delighted to have with us today Matt Franks, who's Director of Events at DRPG. Hi, Matt.
Hello.
Jane Sayers, who is the Chief Film Lead at Content Engine for Shell. And then we have Andrew Reid, who's Board Director and heads up the Corporate Strategy and Account Planning at Shelton Fleming.
Hello, everyone.
Hello to you all, and thank you very much for coming. You're all highly supportive of EVCOM and our efforts, for which we thank you. And I know this is giving up your time again, but thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Now, just to flag to our listeners, you can put questions in the Q&A box and chat box down the side, and we will try and respond to those if appropriate in real time, and I shall put them to the guests, or we'll look at them at the end if that works better. We hope to run for about 45 minutes, and we're recording the session, so this will be made available on the EVCOM website after about 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. So you can review if there's anything that you didn't quite get or you missed out, and that's available for everybody to access tomorrow afternoon. So, I didn't say who I was. I'm Claire Fenello. I am the Executive Director of EVCOM, and this is my second awards with EVCOM, but last year it was all virtual. This year, the award ceremony will be live at the Mayfair Hotel. Terribly excited by that. So, right, onwards with the what the judges are looking for. So we'll start out, we'll ask a question about what makes a standout piece of film, and then we'll move on to the same question for events. So how about we start with Jane. For you, when you're looking at entries, what for you makes a standout piece of film, just how it hits you?
Thanks, Claire. I think from my perspective, what makes a really standout film when you're judging is something that leaves a real lasting impression. I'm always looking for a film that is the last thing I think about before I go to bed that evening. And as you mentioned, you know, I both make films in my role at Shell, where we have 37 global agencies that we work with making films for us, and I head up our internal content engine, which is our in-house film production team at Shell. And they often are applying for awards or submitting entries for awards. So, yeah, those films that really leave a lasting impression are the things that I'm after. And that invariably, I think, is something to do with emotion. Is it a film that makes me laugh? Is it a film that makes me cry? That can be quite difficult to achieve, depending on what your subject matter is, of course. Yeah. Not all topics are likely to be able to evoke either of those emotions, but if they can't evoke those, maybe they can evoke something else. Maybe it's something that just looks really special, or something that's got a really clever concept to it. So it's that sort of, that cleverness, the beauty of the craft, brilliant script writing, anything like that. But whatever it is, it needs that extended lifespan. It needs to be something that I go back to and I think about time and again. And when you can make a film that does that, then you're looking at winning.
Fantastic. That's a really succinct. I think we can all go now, can't we? Matt, should we go over to you and get your view on this?
Yeah, I think it's all the things that you just said. Film for me has to be standout, it has to make a connection with the audience, and it needs to have a very clear message that comes across. I think when I'm judging, I'm looking out for what was the purpose, what was it intended to do, what was the outcome that you wanted to see as a result of watching it, and did it leave me making a connection to that? Did it inspire me to do something different? And that's probably the big things for me.
Okay, so you're sort of making that connection between what the job of the film was and did it deliver on that? Yeah. Okay. Andrew, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I would well, firstly, just in terms of the perspective or the lens that I look at things through, because inevitably these things are partly driven by your own role within an organization and your background. I mean, I've come from a planning background, so a lot of what I do is, and this goes back for decades, is really about, understanding the brief, understanding the market, the objectives, and looking for that deep insight. So in terms of, so that's often a sort of a lens that's being applied to things. But when it comes to, what stands out, I mean, obviously it's a lot like Matt and Jane have just been saying. I mean, it's emotional connection. For me, it's storytelling and production values. Production values do play quite a strong role, although I would, when looking at submissions, also try and balance the money, I think, the budget that has been spent on it, because obviously if something looks like it's had a huge budget, its production values may well be, that bit higher. And I will try to make some compensation and say, right, but the storytelling was really good in this, even if the production values went on par with something else. So I would look at it from that perspective. And I guess the other thing I'm seeking at the very early stage is a really good understanding of the brief, and encapsulating that brief in as fewer words as possible. So it's, what had to be achieved here? What was the objective with the target audience? And what was the really strong insight that was driving, that fed into why that story was told in a certain way? Yeah. And that's kind of where I come from early on.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I'm fascinated that the man talking about production values has a poster of Blade Runner behind him, which has got to be the final word in production values, really, I would say.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, I suppose film is something that you can really see all that stuff in the product that you're judging. When we're talking about events, it's often it's a different thing. I mean, some of our entries do provide films around the event, which is great, but sometimes it is just having to describe it and talk about an event. So, it's slightly harder sometimes to get those things across. But when we're talking about what makes a standout event, this year we're very, very keen that virtual, hybrid, and physical events all get entered into all categories. When we're not creating separate categories for them, so they'll be judged on their own merit. So bearing that in mind, what would you be looking for differently on the event side? Now, Jane, I'll come to you last because I know you're very specifically filmed, so you might not, have a great deal to say. Always want your opinion. And we'll go with Matt, then Andrew, then Jane. So Matt, coming to you, big range of events now. What we'll be looking at when judging.
Yeah, there's so much now, and I think I've been in events for over 20 years, and we're in a wonderful industry and we get inspired by so many things. And so it makes it really difficult. And for all the reasons you've just pointed out, it's also quite hard to judge events, because having not been there, you're reliant on someone being really descriptive with their submission and bringing that to life. And I'll talk about that in a few moments. But I guess what makes a standout event is, first of all, it's got to have a real purpose and clarity. It's got to be relevant and appropriate for the audience. So it's about understanding that audience and knowing what your outcomes need to be, and then designing it so it connects with them on many levels. And having clear purpose and outcomes, and being able to demonstrate that they were achieved. They could be a variety of things, from behavior change through to performance. There's loads of different reasons why you might create an experience or an event, but you need to be clear about why you're doing it. And I think there's a perception that big budgets means big production values, and that's not necessarily true. It's about understanding what have they got to work with and making everything work incredibly hard, but creating a seamless experience that's really going to connect with that audience. Yeah. And a lot of that's done through great content, clear messaging, and you often find an event that's trying to do too many things or have too many messages, and that's when it can get lost in translation. And I think also, if we just think about events for a moment, it's about evidencing the results. So what difference did doing this event make? What did you see from a behavior change point of view? Did you see an increase in brand empathy? And a lot of those things are very hard to measure and they're subjective, but you can certainly capture that by talking to some of the audience that attended or experienced it. And then you alluded to the fact that we're in a different world now. So we've got live events, although we haven't had many of those for a while. Let's hope they're coming back soon. Virtual and hybrid. And equally, I'm not sure we've seen that much hybrid because we haven't been in a place to do so. And so we're constantly talking about what does hybrid look like. And for me, I refer to it more as blended experiences because it's a combination of things coming together. But for the physical events, if we've done any in the past 12 months, what I'd be looking for that would create a standout one is how were they safe? How did you work with the new parameters? And how did you maximize on the value of time that those people invested in attending the event? For virtual, I'd be looking out for how did you use technology? How were you innovative? But also, how were you not using technology to make sure it wasn't a gimmick? So how did you add value and how did you connect with your audiences? Because you can't just sit them in front of a computer screen for 8 hours and expect a live event to just be the same virtually. And then hybrid, the big thing for me that I think would make a standout hybrid event is being able to demonstrate you've thought about your content for both audiences because it's different and you can't be the same. You can't just stick a camera in a live event room and broadcast it.
Yeah. And I would say, you know, now that we're kind of a year in, it is about the delivery and the outcomes rather than, which last year we got a bit of was, oh, this was supposed to be a live event and we had to quickly turn it into one of these. Yeah. So, you know, please pay attention. Whereas now we all know, and it's more about, okay, you started out with the plan to do this.
Yeah.
This is how it rolled out.
I think the audience is less forgiving now because that was fine for a couple of months, but then very quickly there's an expectation that you'll engage with me differently and it now needs to be using this new technology. Yeah. So the way we design it has to be fit for the way we're communicating and who we're communicating with.
Yeah. So, and that needs to be borne in mind with the response that you're putting in for an award. Andrew, can we just jump to you to see if you want to?
Yeah,
I
think
technology is an interesting thing, isn't it?
Technology certainly is interesting. I think again it will go back with events, be they live, hybrid, virtual. For me, it still will go back to, was there a really good understanding of the brief and what insights were coming from that strategic work you've done that then feeds into what the event is. And really the first thing I'm then looking for is actually, does the event theme very quickly communicate what this whole thing is about? I mean, often for me, I think if there's a very simple theme, but in a powerful emotional one, that's already one big box ticked because pretty much I'm probably going to understand everything else that's going to go on within that event. And then the other thing I would say I'm looking for is actually less focus on broadcasting messages and more on engagement. So it goes again back to what Matt was saying. It's really looking at, is it an event where you really feel the audience, be it the remote one or the live one, is interacting? And these days, of course, when you're looking at hybrid, and I agree, I mean, hybrid's only now just beginning to kind of roll out into the marketplaces. There's the freedom to literally do it. Is whether there's been a good understanding of how to make the experience as good for the remote audience and the live audience, and ideally allow the two to interact with each other even. So looking for those kind of connections, which would come back to technology and how you're using technology to do that. And then the final thing on an event, I would say, would be whether the campaign around it was, again, really clever in terms of either setting expectations for that event or driving people, audience to the event and keeping them there, kind of thing. So I think look at that campaign element, which again comes back to the theme, because if that theme and event identity is very strong, often all those other things kind of are more cohesive.
That's a great point. The whole the wraparound comms around it and how you manage to engage your would-be audience to want to come to your event. That's a really good point. I like that a lot. We should hopefully that gets emphasized. Now, Jane, since we've been doing virtual events, the use of film has accelerated at events at quite a pace. I mean, can you see that staying even though we get back to live events, the use of film to engage and communicate and provide content?
I certainly hope that that's the case, Claire. Obviously, I would say that. But I think interestingly, the two disciplines are actually quite similar.
Yeah.
I think the critical thing is that storytelling. It's that discipline that we would apply to film, of telling a story and ensuring you're taking the audience with you, which is very similar, really. But I think, undoubtedly there have been huge opportunities for film content as a result of the lockdown and the pandemic. And I wonder if there'll be the same appetite for live events. I mean, I'm delighted to hear that the EVCOM Film Award and Live Awards are going to literally take place physically this year. That's great. That's very exciting, because I think the industry has missed those sorts of opportunities. And that's a wonderful thing. But I think perhaps we might see that there are less events than the physical events than they were, and that, hybrid obviously has to come to the fore somewhat, and virtual is probably likely to continue. And I think we'll see many more virtual events than we did before. And yes, it's definitely an opportunity for filmmaking. And again, it's that holistic view. It's that holistic look at what the event is attempting to do and everything that surrounds it, which is going to make them shine.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. Writing notes at the same time. So just moving on then. We not only judge what you see in front of you that's presented as a film or the event, we also ask entrants to answer some questions. And this is a constant problem we have, because we dearly love people to answer those questions, because a lot of times we get see attached PDF, and then you open the PDF and it's a 50-page marvelous presentation that they've put together that you have to then hunt around for the pieces of information you want. It's a magnificent thing, but doesn't help the judges, because they're trying to get through the workload. So when we ask these questions, we usually ask them for a purpose. So that's a plea from us for people to please fill in the questions, because there are marks allocated to that. We ask the judges to look at the questions and allocate a certain number of points to that. So I suppose this round of sort of questioning is how do we encourage people to do that well? What makes a good answered written question, if you see what I mean? Because obviously they don't have all the time in the world. We're trying to keep it simple, but when we're asking those questions, how can applicants ensure that they answer those questions effectively? I'm going to go with you, Andrew, to kickstart this one.
I think one has to bear in mind actually the number of submissions that each judge, for example, can't put an exact figure on it, but it's somewhere between 20 and 30, I think, submissions that one's judging. So one's doing it over a period of time to start with. It's virtually impossible to sit down and do it all in one go. So the thing to remember is to keep it extremely concise. So you want fantastic answers to those questions, but they need to be really brief, I think, and concise. It makes it a lot easier to just get through it and to remember what's important. I find it's great when there's film there. Obviously, if it's the film, there's film there, but if it's a live event or a hybrid event and there's some kind of a link you can go to and watch what that thing was about, or there's some people with talking heads giving you a quick snapshot, again allowing you to absorb the main themes and what you were trying to achieve. I think all those things are helpful. I mean, too much copy is just overwhelming ultimately, and the process takes longer. So yeah, concise, brief, and filmic content to explain what you were doing or show what was actually done. Obviously with a film it will be, but is helpful, really helpful.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, we do try to make sure that no judge has more than 25 things to judge each, but some of those, the films can be fairly long, and it's a time-consuming process. So this bit is important to get right. Jane, with the written things in support of film, sometimes I know data can be hard to get hold of. A lot of film entrants, the client is not keen to share stuff. So how would you go about answering the questions in the entry?
Yeah, it can be tricky. I mean, understanding the objective and the audience is really, really important for a judge, and those things are absolutely fundamental. the results, the KPIs, how you got on with them. Yes, you don't always know them at the point that you're submitting. Also, you don't always get that data. You don't always have that analysis at the end of a project. But I think, you know, the judges are capable of judging very well on the objective and the audience. If they understand those two critical things, then they can make a good assessment. I think, interestingly, this year, one of the things that I certainly will want to understand more about is how people have achieved the films, because I'm quite sure lots of people won't have been sending out 3, 4, 5 men crew. I certainly know that within our organisation we've been hugely limited in what we can do. We haven't even attempted to travel anywhere, so everything's been shot remotely, and it will be really interesting to understand the constraints that people are under and how they've actually achieved those films this year in what has been a completely different environment to normal.
Yes, quite. And overcoming hurdles is always a really interesting element to add to any project, because you've managed to deliver this wonderful X, but you've had to do Y first just to get through there. Matt, I mean, the same could possibly be said for events, but usually that data is data and background information is a little more easily to hand. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. I think it's about being clear and concise with that information and using it in a way that's going to evidence the question that you're answering. And I get particularly frustrated when there's a question and it's quite clear, and then what you get back is, I don't know, 4 or 5 paragraphs that just don't answer it. So the big ask is reread it back, and is it answering the question? Put yourself in the shoes of the judge, and is it on point? And would you give yourself, you know, a score if you were to read it? But also be descriptive and give examples. So if you're trying to bring to life an emotional connection that you made with the audience, try and be really descriptive with what that is. And just a point on the film, I think I've seen examples like you referenced earlier with the PDF, Claire, where people just put the PDF. I've seen see film, but then you go and watch the film and you've got to do the same as you would if it was a PDF. You're making an interpretation as a judge, and that information isn't always there. So if you are using film, make sure you're signposting how you're answering those questions. But my advice is answer the question and just keep it bulleted and simple.
Yeah. I mean, as Matt just said, it's not about paragraphs. It's to give the judges a steer, sometimes a flavour, sometimes fact, if you've got that, you know, just to surround your entry with enough information so that the judges understand the conditions in which it was made, what it achieved, what its purpose was. Yeah, all of that stuff. Because if the film is watched or the event is seen in isolation, it may be the best thing in the world, but if one doesn't know why or what came out of it, you know, that diminishes it sometimes.
I was just going to say, can I just jump in on data and measurement? I mean, I remember I've done this, I think, 3 times now. And I know in the first 2 times I was doing it, the data was really important to me when I was, you know, what was the measurement from all of this proved to me. That was quite important in the judging. And I gave quite a heavy emphasis to that. This time round, I don't know, and I come from a research background ultimately as well. I worked in research for years. And so data, completely understand it and see it as important. But actually, a lot of the data I think that we get from our clients post events and so forth is, frankly, sometimes still quite spurious. So I've become kind of wary of that, because you can be told that, you know, there's 5.6 million impressions that have been had here. But if you really start to deconstruct that data, I think it's spurious as to really sometimes who those people were. So I've become I've been giving a little less to that really when doing it, and making, as Jane was saying, a judgment call on what was the objective set out here, and do I sense, if I'd been at that event or I was watching that film, that it would have delivered on that objective, rather than just look at this, you know, there were these many impressions or posts and shares and so forth. Because I really think sometimes that data is not, it's that you don't have time to really break it down anyway with the amount of space we give people to answer it. So hence it sounds fantastic, but I'm not sure the data is always really telling you how great it was.
I think that's a really important point, Andrew, actually, isn't it? Because with data, especially impressions, you don't know how much money has been put behind a paid media campaign in order to get that across the line.
Yeah.
So impressions almost is meaningless. Then you're in the hands of companies like EVCOM. How well have they actually done in terms of your paid campaign? Unless you're comparing impressions together with, engagement. If you get X million impressions and X million engagements, then you might start be able to judge proportionally. Exactly. But then we would get into a situation where we were having to ask for a whole load of data from a lot of people, and many people wouldn't have access to that. So I think, we have to make intelligent decisions and not rely too heavily on it.
Yeah, I think I would stress that you don't want people to be going into endless amounts of data pools and all the rest of it, because you do want it to be a more even playing field, because if not everybody has access to that, then that's a bit tricky. But yes, it's just to sort of concentrate people's minds on the fact that if you have got information that shows how this worked or that worked, or people's response to that and the other, this is the place to put it, because it can show what your event or film has achieved. But yeah, no, I don't think we don't need endless numbers and counts and whatnot. But important to provide some, feedback or success or benefit or something that can link back to the work that you've done. Now, the next question here, I fear that we may have sort of touched on a little bit at the beginning, but it's more of a, what are you looking for, just generally? So we've talked about creativity, innovation, logistical know-how, but I suppose this is a very personal question. Is that what gets you excited about your area of expertise? What do you think? And you can reference previous winners, but maybe just sort of say what exactly you think is brilliant about a piece of work. Matt, we'll start with you.
Okay. Do you know what, the world that we live in, we're inspired by so much stuff, and we see so much, and there's so much great talent out there, so we're spoiled, really. So I always step back and kind of, I'm really impressed with how people are so resourceful, and often in challenging situations or circumstances or budget parameters, you find people come up with some incredible solutions and ways of delivery that you never thought were possible. And those, for me, are the bits where I get really excited, because I'm like, that's a point of difference, and that potentially is doing something we've not done before. So I particularly look out for things like that, how people have been resourceful or creatively approach something. I really like when they bring the audience on the journey as well. So whoever the target audience is, involving them. And I think we've seen a significant rise of user-generated content and engagement, and there's an increased expectation. But the way we're using that material and information is probably more prominent than it's ever been before. So I look out for things like that. I think, Claire, you made a point earlier on, which is really key for me, and that's about setting out the conditions that you were working on with your event or film, because that also means it's easier to compare with others because you understand the context. And I think, for me, it's around the how we're resourceful and the different applications that we use to bring things to life.
Yeah, and I would say that, we've tried to make it as open as possible, the whole awards, because you want people who have been given a great big budget to do something to enter, but you also want people who are a small company and maybe they only work on a couple of projects a year, also to enter, and be confident that the jury that we have and the judges that we have are experienced professionals, and they can you can look at those as two separate things and understand the merits of both. Just because you had a great big budget doesn't mean it's going to be brilliant, and just because you had a tiny budget doesn't mean you haven't delivered exactly what the client wanted. And that is important, that all those different ranges of projects can be entered, as long as we've just said you put in the sort of the conditions under which they were made. And I think that's where we talked about innovation and creativity before, that you might think, well, actually, in the bigger world, this doesn't look hugely innovative. But for this client to have moved them on, dramatically from what they used to do to doing this, that's been a hugely creative step for them. And, you know, that's interesting information because, you know, you as the filmmaker or event company have taken them on that journey. And I think that that's a really important thing to get across, if that's what you've done. Andrew, how about you?
Well, I think it partly does go back to what Matt was saying about resourcefulness. I think it's particularly true in the Clarions, because in theory, I would say with the Clarions, because the topic, it's all about, you know, purpose-led marketing, and there's, you know, it's going to be sustainability or some sort of human issue you're dealing with. By definition, there's going to be a lot of human stories, a lot of emotion kind of generated in that kind of submission. So I think things that do resonate is when I see somebody who really think actually they had a pretty tight budget and they still delivered emotionally, made a strong emotional connection, or they got their message, you know, they got their message across. I remember there was one, I don't think it got gold, but I think a lot of us commented this year, there was one which was talking about a medical condition, and it was actually meant for very senior kind of physicians and doctors, but it took you on that journey actually with what I think was a relatively modest budget, and really got one to understand a quite complex topic. And at the end, well, having watched it, I remember at the time thinking, actually, that was a pretty clever piece of production there and storytelling on that. So, and it wasn't I doubt it was the biggest budget of all the submissions, right? So that really, you know, it got us, we did go talking about it, and I can't remember if it got anything from this, but I think it did get a mention actually. So those things, that's important, I think. Yeah. Particularly in these purpose-driven ones, where really you would hope to be making emotional connections because of the topic in the first place.
But I also think in this current climate, there's so little money rattling around that nobody's making things just to see how it works. Everyone's got very tight briefs, tight budgets, tight time scales. You know, there's people having to make every little thing go a lot further. Jane, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think absolutely, Claire, you're right. I think from my perspective, I'm always looking for clever. Andrew mentioned the word earlier, and I think that's a critical thing. It's a thought, it's a concept, it's a creative idea that's clever, or something that's cleverly executed. And if it surprises, then all the better. I remember years ago now watching a film that was actually a comedy about a children's cancer charity. Yeah. And that was clever, because the genre doesn't make any sense. Why would you do a comedy? You would always go down the emotional route. And the fact that they pulled off something that was incredibly funny and very hard hitting just was immensely clever. Production values weren't fantastic. I think the budget was probably relatively small, but that was a big award winner just on the account of the fact that it wowed, you know, it amazed, it surprised, and it was really innovative. So it's that kind of clever, innovative filmmaking that I'll be really pleased to see.
That's a hard trick to pull off, isn't it, that one?
Very much so, yeah.
So final sort of question really for you all to sort of discuss, and you know, then we'll go on to any final words of advice. But we noticed with the Clarions this year, and we talked about it in the awards ceremony, we had various people on to discuss it. There were trends that we hadn't seen in previous years. So, for example, in the Clarions, which, as Andrew implied, for maybe those who don't know, it's all about sort of work with purpose and purpose-driven work. We saw a lot of animation and a increase in the use of the spoken word. So I'm wondering if you think that will follow through, or do you think there may be other trends that have come out of this? Because the London Live on Film is a sort of a broader spectrum, really. It covers all sorts. There are a lot of categories you can enter. We have increased the animation sector because there are so many different elements of animation that I don't think the animation community were thrilled with us because we weren't doing it very well, but we hopefully have made that better. Where do you see things maybe looking different this year? We'll start with you, Jane.
I think, I predict we'll see more shows that are based around stock footage. And clever use of stock footage, perhaps visual effects combining with stock footage, that kind of thing. I think a lot of people have had to turn to that just because of the lack of feasibility of actually filming. I think we'll see that. I think we'll see an upsurge in animation for sure. And I think we'll see lower production values, and I hope we'll see honesty though. I think, and that's a really critical thing for judging this year as well. I think we just need to remember the year that it's been and the climate that people have been working in.
Yeah.
And I think if things are clearly filmed on a GoPro instead of a Red or something, then, you know, fine, so be it.
Yeah. And do you think we might have peaked on the sort of user-generated content? Because last year's London Live and Film Awards, we got quite a lot of that. And even in that sort of short space of time of that, the first 6 months of the pandemic, you could see the quality getting better and better, you know, starting off really shaky on people's phones and everyone getting more confident. But I wonder if that's maybe peaked and gone, or if that's still around.
I suspect I don't think we've peaked yet, Claire.
Okay.
But maybe the production values of user-generated content are still climbing. Let's hope.
Have improved with it, yes. And people have got these sort of home film sets that come now, so hopefully the whole thing was improved, because it was a bit shaky, some of it. Andrew, what about you?
I'd agree. I think animation was clearly much more evident this year, and again, I think it goes back to because of us being in lockdown, when it hasn't been able to send out large crews to capture footage and so forth. So there's been a greater reliance on what can one do from one studio in that kind of remote sense. So I think, and it helps. It doesn't mean it actually can improve it, because you have complete control with animation over what it is you're saying and how you say it. So I think it's brought quite a lot to the party. I think generally this would apply across. I think we'll see it coming up this year more. So I think we're going to see a lot more what I would call TV production values coming in, partly because the virtual and hybrid has had to kind of make that leap to, you know, not just thinking in terms of a webcast, but actually, you know, really putting it on as if it was, I don't know, you were putting on Newsnight or something. So really bringing those kind of values through. I would expect that to come through even more this year. As we go forward. Absolutely true about stock footage. I think, again, there's been a lot of leaning on that. I suppose once there's a bit more freedom to go out and originate film and do things in outside of that environment, then we'll see more of that. And the other thing, just generally, I think about themes, but this is, I don't know if this is to do with judging. I think this is just where the world's going. I mean, sustainability and community, because I think the two are going to go hand to hand. I would expect to see a lot more storytelling coming up in the coming year around that theme, and the fact that sustainability involves bringing lots of different communities together. So I would imagine a lot of film and a lot of events and so forth or experiences are going to be looking to bring communities together around that narrative.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's really interesting. And that, yes, we might find that our two lots of awards programs are starting to collide a little. That's an interesting thought for moving forward. Before going on to you, Matt, I mean, one thing, because you both mentioned their stock footage, is there a danger with sort of smaller budgets and coming out of this situation that clients will get used to a certain level of production value and price level and cost level and get used to that and be reluctant to go back to the sort of maybe slightly bigger budget using, or, you know, always going out and filming new footage? Are people worried about that at all? This is turning into a different conversation, but I just think it's quite an important issue.
I worry a little bit about that, Claire. Yeah. I mean, at Shell, we had double whammy because lockdown happened and our share price, because of the oil crash, sort of fell through the floor. So the budgets were curtailed hugely.
Yeah.
And we haven't yet seen a return to the sort of budgets that we were dealing with before. That's not to say our budgets were ever huge. They were, small to reasonable most of the time. But there were an awful lot of small last year. We're beginning to see a little bit more reasonable, but I think sometimes clients don't necessarily understand the value of higher production values. So I think that might be a battle to get back to those budgets where we can do something really splendid.
Yeah, a bit of an education program ahead. Matt, on to you. What do you think we might see in terms of trends this year?
Similar points that have just been kind of talked through, really. I think from a event perspective, if we take virtual events and communications as a whole, we will definitely see the rise of TV production values to that. But I also think we'll see a more varied use of technology, how people have integrated technology and made it more meaningful, because we probably saw a lot of use where it was a bit gimmicky and we weren't quite sure what we were getting as an engagement level or an output. So I think we'll see that. I think we'll see a rise of event campaigns, because there'll be more than a moment in time. People have broken what was a one-day event or a two-day event into a series of communications, and so we'll see more around event campaigns as a whole. I think we'll see more engagement from user-generated experiences, and that's them contributing to the content or getting more actively involved in the virtual experience than they have done before. And I suppose I'm focusing more on virtual because I think it's likely we'll see the majority of virtual entries. And then my last point is around the rise of peer-to-peer engagement and recognition. We'll see a lot more people talking about surprise and delight moments, celebration, recognition. We haven't been able to do the normal awards, and actually they're quite hard to translate, or normal incentive trips or anything like that. And people have been really resourceful, and I've been quite inspired by some of the things coming through, how you've had peer-to-peer recognition or people knocking at each other's doors, or all sorts of things going on. And I think we'll see the rise of that as well.
Yeah. Interesting to see. I've spoken to a few of our members where, because they haven't been able to do events, they've done more around the event communications, and I think that's been mentioned a few times as sort of the wider piece, and then that comes around. You mentioned a series of events. It's around the communication of your event. It's become a much bigger thing than it ever was when it was a day. Maybe a few little things before and a little roundup at the end of it. It's become a big communications package now, which is, going forward, I think is probably a very, very good thing, because it will help to elevate that function. I think in some cases in the past, the event, has sometimes sort of maybe had a hard time proving its worth, but if it can, over a longer period of time and have many, many, many more touch points, I think that's a great thing for people who are positioned to be able to do that and offer it.
I think actually what's happened there, I don't know, this may be moving off specifically awards, but it just into what's happening is because of the virtual, what's happened with virtual, and I think we've probably all seen this, is that there's so much more data there. So what's happened when we first started doing virtual events, 18 months ago, they were being produced and they were one-off. And then suddenly the clients coming along and say, well, we need to integrate this now with our Salesforce. We need to integrate it with, XYZ platform on registration and so forth. And so suddenly you've got this culture building up of finally, in a way, looking at the overall journey that you're taking the audience on, not just at the event, but before and after. And you're able to kind of analyze that journey, you're able to track it because it's all happening remotely in a digital world. And suddenly, that's a really big shift, actually, I think now, and it will probably be here to stay. Even when we go back into live, there'll be a much greater comfort saying we need to capture on that individual what they experienced and carry that into the next thing that they experience with us and so forth. So that's been a pretty big positive shift out of all this, actually.
I think so, and just an individual standalone event that people turn up to and go will not be sufficient for clients going forward now that they've had a taste of what
exactly
is possible. No, it's really interesting. Okay, so final, we're just running up to the last few minutes. Final words of advice. Okay, so you've got somebody in front of you who's got 3 things to enter. They're stressing, the deadline approaches. It all looks like a monumental faff to have to do this. We want them to enter because, the more entries we have, the greater the experience, and it elevates the good work so that you can really see what the cream has risen to the top. What would you advise that poor, stressful person?
Start writing your entry now. How about that? Start straight away. Brevity and clarity. That would be my advice.
Yeah, don't leave it to the last minute, but be brief and be clear. Fantastic. Thank you very much. And Matt, how about you?
It takes time to write a good entry and be super clear with it. Talk about the challenges and your conditions, because I think that's really important to give the context of what you were working with.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I would say obviously quite similar things. I would say really, really clearly communicated, strong insights. You know what's driving everything. Keep it absolutely brief as you possibly can. And I think a little honesty is actually quite refreshing when you're reading these things, because sometimes there is some honesty expressed about the challenges that were confronted and so forth. And that's actually helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
I'm not saying anybody's lying, by the way, within their submission, but there's ways of saying we had a challenge with this part of it.
Yeah.
Those kind of acknowledgements are helpful as well.
Yes, and again, it's all the real world context that everybody's experienced. It's and then it all helps. I mean, all I would add from our perspective, EVCOM, is these are sort of like little logistical things that when we ask you to fill in the entrance form and we say, please don't put your company name in there. Please don't put your company name in the body copy, because I have to read every single entry and redact it. So that's a big task. So you might have very kindly left it out of the title, but then in and amongst the copy, you've mentioned the company name several times. And where it always catches you out is when you put the thing at the end from a client saying what a wonderful job you did, and they name you. So that's my please don't do that. And then yes, brevity is a wonderful thing. If you've said it in 600 words, see if you can say it in 300, and then see if you can say it in 150. That would be really very much appreciated. But we're super excited. Entries are already coming in, so that's brilliant. Keep them coming. We're very much looking forward to the whole process this year. We're going all guns blazing. We will be the judges will be judging online, but then we'll be getting you together in your cohorts to discuss the your final outcomes. We will have the ceremony, and then post ceremony, we're going to host a screening with some content as well, so that people can come along and have a look at things on a big screen, and we'll have people talking about the winning work. So we've got a really packed sort of awards program over the next couple of months. So we're looking forward to getting all those lovely entries. So with that, I'd just like to thank our lovely panel. Thank you so much for being with us today, Matt, Jane, and Andrew, and good luck with your judging. And pay heed with your own advice there, and start early.
When is the submission date, Claire? When's the final date?
Hang on. Judging starts 19th of August, but you've got a month. So you finish 16th of September.
Super.
Okay, so thank you all very much, and thank you for those people attending. I hope it was helpful. Please do continue to contact Amelia and I if you have any very specific questions, and we'd be delighted to help. All right, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.